Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining this session from in the world. Thank you for taking your time to join this session. My name is Naresh, and I'm a product consultant here for the PAM suite of products at Manage Engine. As you can see on the screen here today, what we will be looking through the session is the components of identity security and privileged access management that you will need in your enterprise that will put you ever so close to achieving NIS2 compliance. Right. So before we dive in, a quick set of house rules. All attendees today are on listen-only mode by default. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A panel on the left. We'll address the questions towards the end of the session. The recording of this particular session will be sent to all attendees and registrants in a couple of days. If you have any queries, if you have any feedback regarding the session or the product itself, please feel free to reach out to us at hello-pam360@manageengine.com. Great. So before we start discussing NIS2, what it stands for, how it came to be, and everything else that are part of the NIS2 package, let's try to focus on the approach towards any sort of compliance requirement itself, right? So from the conversations that we've had with our prospects, customers, and other industry experts, we've come to understand that organizations of today typically fit into either of these two categories that you see on the screen, right? So organizations tend to take a checkbox approach mostly when it comes to meeting compliance mandates in general. So what do I mean when I say checkbox approach, right? I'm talking about a situation where there is an audit that is right around the corner, and organizations tend to proliferate IT solutions that quickly help them as a stopgap mechanism that helps them with the audit that is right around the corner, and they move on, right? Because it helps them complete the audit and at the same time stay compliant, and at the same time, for the temporary period, the solutions help them stay secure with respect to their use cases. But in the long run, we've come to understand from the experience that we've had, the news that we read, the incidents that actually occur, that this is not a viable solution in the longer run, right? We've seen that taking a security first approach towards addressing compliance mandates is a much more sustainable way to attain compliance in general, right? So what do I mean when I say security first approach? It is to not treat compliance as the ultimate goal, that is achieving compliance requirements as the ultimate goal, rather focusing on the core use cases that your IT needs and focusing on solutions and focusing on security practices that your IT needs in the first place will gradually lead to compliance by itself, right? So approaching compliance as an add-on that complements your security practice puts you in a win-win situation where you will also stay secure in the longer run, but at the same time, you also meet compliance mandates in general, right? So with that philosophy in mind, let's move on to discuss NIS2 and see how privileged access management fits into this NIS2 story, right? So what is NIS2, how it came to be, right? So that is something that we will look in. So in 2016, NIS1 came into effect. Back then, it was just called NIS because NIS2 did not exist at that point in time, right? So organizations and the regional body that came up with NIS was pretty much happy with the requirements that they had at that point in time because it did fit the narrative in 2016, right? But threat actors and other cyber threats proved that they're always one step ahead when it comes to these things. And in 2017 was a testament to that particular statement, right? Because we saw a series of high-profile data breaches happen back to back throughout the years. Some things to mention are the Equifax data breach, the WannaCry and the NotPetya ransomware ran wild in 2017, and the Spectre and Meltdown that no one can forget, right? So all of these are incidents that took place in 2017 that put the world in a shock. And in 2018, the EU comes up with GDPR, right, which again highlighted the need for an update in the existing NIS protocol of that time, right? Because GDPR put more liabilities with respect to data handling when it came to NIS, which weren't addressed in the 2016 version of it, right? And 2020, we all know what happens. Almost every single organization that had some form of data to handle moved some part of their IT to the cloud, right? And they welcomed a digital revolution in 2020, and we all know the reason behind what happened and why it happened, right? And this is something in 2016 they never predicted, right? The pandemic was not something that was on the cards for us. And in 2021, to add fuel to the burning fire, the US colonial pipeline attack happened. The Kaseya ransomware ran wild, and these are just a few mentions of everything else that happened in 2020 or 2021 as a effect of the mass digitization that began in 2020. Right, it left a lot of network backdoors open, and enough was enough. And in 2022, the EU sat together and came up with an updated version of the NIS protocol, which is now what we know as the NIS2. Right? It came into effect in NIS. It came into effect in 2022, and towards the end of 2024, the EU expected that all the member nations to transpose NIS2 into national law by the end of 2024. And with the end of almost towards the end of the first quarter of 2025, it is a question that I would like all of you to keep in mind as we progress through the session. Is that, have you achieved NIS2 compliance yet? Right? Now we've seen how why NIS2 came into place. Now let's try to figure out what is different, right? So apart from the articles and the paragraphs that you read in the document, on a high level, NIS2 has addressed a couple of stuff. So first things first, to make matters more serious, to expect organizations to take things more seriously, and to indulge that sense of responsibility within them, the fines for NIS2 have increased massively, right? And apart from that, NIS1 particularly focused on some key industries, some key industry categories under which organizations fell. For example, financial, healthcare, energy, water are something that the NIS1 already focused on, right? But with the introduction of NIS2, it now encapsulates around 160K plus organizations that are affected by the NIS2, right? The limit or the scope of industries that NIS2 ranges from aerospace, insurance, industrial industries, entertainment, research, food and beverage, and whatnot, right? So this made matters more interesting for organizations to actually take seriousness with respect to achieving NIS2 compliance, and that is where we are right now, right? And while NIS2 talks about so the concept of cybersecurity demands in the NIS2 directive itself is sprinkled throughout the document, right? But what we will be focusing on today is the identity security and the privileged access management part of the IT security that NIS2 demands, right? NIS2 claims for data handling, HR, asset management, service management, and whatnot, right? These are all IT terms with respect to security that is sprinkled throughout the document. Now, but what we will specifically focus on is identity and access management and the essential controls that will help you achieve NIS2 compliance when it comes to identity security in general, right? So we sat down with our legal team, right? And we figured out, so these are just highlighted paragraphs for your reference at the moment, but we sat down with the legal team and figured out controls and how our product fits into these requirements and how our products help you achieve certain requirements that the NIS2 actually claims for, right? So certain paragraphs that PAM controls as a whole addresses is 54, 85, 89, 49, and 102, right? Specifically ransomware protection, supply chain security, cyber hygiene practices for users and infrastructure, and incident reporting, right? So these are the five major paragraphs that privileged access management basically, the functions of privileged access management basically translates to the controls, right? So what do these paragraphs say, right? Firstly, it suggests that organization should implement a management system or a centralized vault where all the identities, including non-human and human identities, are stored, right? And not just stored, organizations are also expected to automatically discover them from both cloud and hybrid environments. And once these are stored in a central place, organizations are also expected to share them with the privileged user base in a just-in-time manner. So what do I mean when I say just-in-time? The right person who needs it when they need it and not a minute more. That's basically what just-in-time translates to, right? And organizations are also expected to practice extended control after sharing when a user is taking, when a user is accessing a particular system or an environment using the privilege that you've shared, you're also expected to record those particular actions and further audit those particular actions later for investigation purposes, right? And NIS2 believes that these actions mitigate supply chain attacks in general, right? Apart from that, it also addresses the fact that providing access is not where the story ends, and the fact that this access is mostly shared in terms of admin level privilege sharing, which is done in most cases, right? So NIS2 expects an implementation of control that removes local admin accounts from endpoints to prevent ransomware attacks, right? So that basically means organizations are expected to give admin level access only when they need admin level access, right? Apart from that, all of these controls are expected to be approached from a zero trust principle, where you do not place the trust on the user who's taking the access, rather criticize every single access that is being, every single privileged access that is being launched within the environment, right? NIS2 also suggests employing a policy-based approach where you have a list, or where you have a list of uh, suggestions or list of criteria where a certain action would lead to a policy violation and thus terminating access to a privileged user, right? And following all of these, authentication becomes the basis of what NIS2 is, when it comes to identity management, what NIS2 is based on. So MFA is also part of the parcel, right? MFA is something that we've been talking about for years now, and major every other compliance requirement demands MFA, and NIS2 is also part of that bandwagon, basically, right? So now, for this particular session, right, we will see how privileged access management solution helps you address these NIS2 controls that we just saw, right? And the fact that these NIS2 controls translates to how a PAM solution in general works, right? Privileged account discovery, role-based access control, session management and recording, dynamic trust scoring for policy-based access control, managing cloud entitlements for your hybrid environments, and non-human entities such as certificates, certificate lifecycle management. All of these are the controls that we basically saw in the previous slides, and also what are the core functionalities of any PAM solution in general, right? So let me take you through how this actually works, right? How privileged access management, how a privileged access management solution can help you achieve these controls in general, right? And for that purpose, the screen that you're seeing right now is Manage Engine PAM 360, right? It is Manage Engine's privileged access management platform, right? So the screen that you're seeing here right now basically is the dashboard that helps you. Yeah, the screen that you're seeing here right now is basically the dashboard that has all the details about all the passwords that are stored in the environment, the violations these passwords face, the conflicting passwords, expired passwords, every other detail that you need is visualized in this particular dashboard, right? Now, as any other PAM solution, PAM 360 also functions on two major parts, right? The privileged endpoints that your privileged users need access to, right? So your privileged endpoints from your environment can be discovered from multiple places, including your Active Directory, including your including any other Linux devices that you might have, including your network devices, virtual machines, or your devices or your VMs that are stored in your AWS environments. Everything can be discovered and be stored inside PAM360, right? And apart from that, PAM360 supports over 60 types of resource types, right? Endpoint types, which is basically what we call resource types in the product itself. Yeah, so that is the primary part of how you can centralize access from a vaulting perspective, right? So it's a centralized vault where you have all the privileged identities that are part of your environment stored and are shared with your privileged users, right? So let's come to that part. You can also discover the privileged users that are part of your environment and have them centrally located in one particular place where you can share these privileged identities on a time-based manner. So before we jump the gun, let's talk about how you can discover these users, right? You can add them manually, right? If it's one particular user, you can also discover them from your Active Directory or from your or from any other directory that follows an LDAP protocol, or from your Microsoft Entra environment and whatnot, right? And even applications, right? Let's assume you have applications that fetch passwords. They can also be added, but the API that calls to fetch the password is added as an API user. So that's basically how this works. That's what you see here add an API user, right? So this is how you onboard users and the endpoints into PAM360, right? So what is left? You share access to your privileged user, right? Now, to just give some insight, I also have a user screen logged in here, right? So the light theme that you see here is where I've logged in as the administrator, as you can see here. And the dark screen that you see here is where I've logged in as the user, right? Logged in as the guest user. And this particular guest user can be spotted in the admin screen in the user section, right? You can see guest, right? And this particular user is also provided with a particular trust score. Now, you can keep that trust score in mind. We'll come to that part later. But for now, this is the administrator screen. This is the user screen. And as you can see, when I come to the user screen, almost all of the privileges that I had as the administrator is now gone, right? While the administrator has access to the configurations that are part of the console, right? The user does not. This is all the user sees, right? And as a user, I have certain endpoints shared to me, and you can see that I cannot see the password for these particular endpoints, right? And you can also see that for this particular endpoint, for a couple of particular endpoints, I do not have the password icon, but I rather have a request button, right? So what is happening behind the screen, right? So as an administrator, what I've basically done is for that particular resource, which is PMP Win11, right? I have configured an access control for the account that is stored in there, right? This is an administrator account for this particular machine. And in the access control section, when I come here to configure access control, you can see that there is a particular setting where I have enforced any user who needs access to this machine to provide a reason for the password retrieval, right? Now, apart from that, I can also, at the configuration level itself, if I do not want the guest user to have admin level privileges, I can elevate them temporarily to a particular local group, right? And they will have access to that particular machine at an admin level only for that particular time, right? So let's see how this works. Now, this particular account, as you can see, when I click share with users, you can see that it has been shared to guest, right? I can give access to this particular machine, right? So when I come to the user screen, all I have to do as a user who does not need access to this particular machine all the time and only temporarily, I request for that particular password, right? And since I've enforced a reason on the admin side, I'm now asking, as a user, I've now been asked for a reason, right? And once I've given the reason, the administrator will now be authorized to approve the particular access request. So when I come to the admin tab, all the access requests that are raised will be seen here, right? So when I click on process request, I can also choose when the user can access the password. When I click on later, I can give them a start time and end time, but we are not going to do that now. I'm going to let the user access the password immediately, right? So as an administrator, I have approved this particular password request. Now, once that is done, the user will now be able to check out this particular password, right? Now, when I click on checkout, I will be able to launch a remote session into the particular account, right? So when I click on RTP console session, I will be able to log in remotely to this particular device. Now, while this is happening, the administrator also will be able to join this session remotely and shadow what is happening, what the guest user is doing on the other side, right? So it can either pop up in the notification section, or when you go to the audits tab, you'll be able to see that there is an active privilege session that is launched, that is operated by the guest user, right? So I can either join the session live, which I'll show you right now, right? You can see that as a guest user, if I'm going to do any action here, the administrator will also be able to see that particular action, right? And now, if the user uh, is up to something suspicious, something that is not part of his job profile, something that the task does not entail, something that is suspicious, I will be able to terminate the session immediately from the screen, right? So when I click on terminate the session, that will directly end, right? So this is how remote session management basically works. Now, when I come to the user screen, the session is now terminated, and the user will simply be able to check in the password, right? And apart from that, based on a particular time that was allotted, the session will also end automatically, right? And thus proving just-in-time elevated access for this particular guest user. Now, apart from that, as an administrator, I can also define trust scores for the resources that are stored in PAM 360 and the users who access these resources from PAM 360, right? So I have certain criteria here. For example, if there are invalid sign-in attempts, right, the user trust score is meant to reduce, right? And if there are non-office hour sign-in, right, based on the predefined controls that you set in the solution, if there are non-office hour sign-in, then the user trust score is meant to go down. Similarly, at the endpoint level, right, at the Windows resource level itself, if the guest user, if you do not want your privileged users to install a certain browser plugin that is not part of your organizational policy, or if the endpoint does not have antivirus active, right, you can mention those criteria as part of the trust score, and the endpoint trust score will also reduce based on that, right? So that is essentially why you can see that the trust score here is defined based on these particular actions, right? Now, that basically covers how you can centralize your privileged access routines by vaulting them from a single console and sharing access to your privileged users just in time. And even if they need admin level access, even that is given just in time with an elevation, right? So that is essentially how you vault and share access to your privileged users. Now, these are for on-premises requirements, right? Now, let's assume you have you have cloud IAM accounts and you have an AWS tenant that is running in your environment, right? So PAM 360 can also discover your AWS accounts from your cloud presence. Just a second, let me just quickly refresh the screen. Yeah. So yeah, here you can see that an AWS account is already added, right? Now, you never know, right? When you have a multiple service providers, let's assume you have an Azure account, you have a GCP account, and you have an AWS account. These vendors do not talk to each other, right? So you need a centralized place where you can visualize what is happening in these environments, what privileges are associated to these particular IAM users, what are the policies that are mandated to these users, and how you can remediate them from a single screen. And as you can see, once I've added an AWS account, which you can do here, right? This is how it's shown. The total amount of entities are shown on the screen. The impact that at a security level, what impact that does this particular account have is also shown. So when I go inside this, you'll also be able to see the users that are discovered as part of your AWS instance, right? And also the user groups that these users are also part of is also discovered side by side. Now, the risks that are associated with these users and user groups are immediately visualized for you on screen, right? So you can see that out of the 987 IAM users that I have here, 982 do not have MFA enabled as part of their policy, right? 479 have shadow admin access, 480 have access privileges, right? And all of these can be remediated with a single click, right? Now, before we jump to that step, let me also show you the access maps for these particular users, to where you can visualize what are the policies that these users have access to and whatnot. So when I click on a particular user, let's say I'm clicking on this particular username, Anand, right? You see that Anand has administrator access, which is a policy that is mandated for Anand, right? And these are the permissions that are attached as part of the policy and the services that this policy allows Anand to access, right? Now, when I come to the policy details, you'll be able to see the policy that is a part of the administrator access policy, which is associated to Anand, right? And this is where you remediate that particular issue. So here, when I come to users, you see that Anand has a critical impact within your AWS tenant, and Anand has access privileges, MFA is not enabled, and whatnot, right? So when I come to risk and remediation, I can remediate, let's assume I want to remediate Anand's shadow admin privileges at the moment, right? So when I click on remediate, PAM360 automatically suggests a detailed policy analysis for this particular IAM user, right? And when I click on remediate, it automatically translates this policy in your AWS instance directly, right? So when that happens, so when you have multiple accounts with multiple risks as a part of their policy, right, from different vendors that don't talk to each other, you need a centralized solution where you can immediately fix such issues. And you also need a solution that throws light on the issues in the first place, right? Because all of these vendors are siloed and they do not have enough visualization when it comes to the risks that are associated as part of these particular accounts, right? Now, this is with respect to your cloud entities. Now let's talk about non-human entities, right? Let's talk about certificates, SSH keys and whatnot, right? So PAM360's certificate lifecycle management module helps you discover certificates that are part of your network, right? You can create new certificates, you can renew those certificates, right? For example, you can see that this particular certificate is valid till March 8th, right? And all the certificate strides that the industry is making. Google wanted a 30-day, Google wanted a 90-day policy for certificates. Apple followed suit with a 45 days mandate and whatnot, right? So all of these are very imminent, and you need an automatic solution where certificate renewal is no longer something that is always in the back of your mind. It's something that needs to happen automatically, right? Because we know this type of incidents that a simple certificate discontinuation can lead to, right? And the business impact and the ramifications in terms of security that it can lead to, right? These are news that we read every day. So you need a solution that automatically renews these certificates immediately. So the PAM360 is that solution which can do that for you, right? Now, while all of these controls help you achieve NIS2 compliance in the backend, right? PAM360 also helps you prove that particular NIS2 compliance with the reports that it automatically generates for you, right? So when you come to compliance reports in PAM360, you see that NIS2 by default is a report that PAM 360 supports, apart from all the other industry leading compliance reports that PAM 360 supports for, right? So you can like we saw ransomware protection, right? If you pick up the ransomware protection paragraph, you can schedule a report automatically based on the paragraph or based on the control that you require for, right? So it will list all current active privilege sessions based on the audit that PAM 360 does for you automatically. So it keeps you ever ready for the audits that are in the corner, right? So you no longer need to take a checkbox approach towards addressing compliance requirements, and especially in NIS2, because PAM 360 can help you do that at a security level itself, right? It helps you mandate all these controls, but at the same time, it helps you prove compliance with the automatic reports that it helps you provide, that it provides for you, right? And in turn helps you with your audits, right? So that is essentially everything that PAM 360 at a core level helps you achieve with respect to NIS2 compliance, right? And not just NIS2, PAM 360 can help you privileged access management as a concept, and in turn, PAM 360 can help you achieve multiple other regional mandates, multiple other compliance requirements globally, right? It can help you achieve compliance with PCI DSS, right? You also need a FISMA compliance if you're going to take government contracts with the American organizations, right? It helps you achieve parts of the DORA compliance as well, right? PAM as a concept is omnipresent when it comes to when you start talking about compliance, and it is the core functionality that any compliance requirement talks about in their requirements when it comes to cybersecurity. Right now, to do all of this, PAM 360 also has extended use cases apart from the things that you've seen today, right? We've seen CI, we have seen cloud infrastructure and development management, but PAM 360 can also enable application command control, right? So let's assume the guest user has access to a Windows resource, but you do not want the guest user to access other applications. You need the guest user to access only a certain application at an admin level. You can do that, right? Let's assume the guest user has access to a Linux machine. You do not want the guest user to implement all sorts of commands in the Linux machine, and you only need you only want to give a limited level of access to this particular user, right? You can do that as well, right? With application command control that's part of PAM 360. You can automate tasks. You can make PAM 360 communicate with other business solutions that is a part of an enterprise. For example, HRMS2. Let's assume you have a third-party vendor that is part of your of the job profile that you're hiring for, right? So let's assume there's a third-party vendor that's part of your team. Once a third-party vendor is added into the HRMS solution, the privileged task automation feature for PAM 360 automatically adds them to PAM 360, routing all privileged access through a single console, which you've seen today, right? So this is all that PAM 360 is capable of, and much more, right? But what do you take back from today? What does this session entail? Where do you start, right? Like many other industry experts, right, there are a few steps when it comes to identity security, right? The primary of it, enforcing MFA. That is something that we all have been seeing throughout as a trend in the industry, or trend a decade ago, but now something that is a basic requirement for any organization in the industry, right? Eliminating hard coding of credentials is also something where you can focus on, right? Let's assume you have a CI/CD pipeline where you have codes that are fetched, where you have codes that are performing privileged operations that fetch that need passwords that are to be hard coded. The first step to doing it is removing the hard coding of credentials and rather using APIs to fetch the credentials that are required for the privileged operation from a central console, which can be PAM 360, right? Removing unwarranted administrative privileges, that is also something where you can focus on, right? To not give administrative access to users who only temporarily need it, right? that is also something where you can focus on. And all the other stuff that you've seen here is something where you can start with respect to as the first step as to achieving NIS2 compliance, right? Now, with PAM 360, you can get started immediately. The QR code on the screen will take you to the download website for the solution. You can download the solution immediately and you can get started now, right? That brings me to the end of the session. That is everything that I've had to share with you today. Thank you so much.